Hello, and welcome to I Am Not For Everyone, the podcast for those looking to release shame, heal from trauma, and feel really, really good being their fully expressed, authentic selves. My name's Dr. Lee, and I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and a certified clinical trauma professional, as well as a mom, wife, and a human being navigating the world with complex PTSD. Season 1 of this podcast came about because I was tired of spending decades living in a shame-filled, trauma-laden body and brain. And after doing a lot of work and learning how to return to a safe, grounded place in my life, I knew it was time for me to take my experience in education and use my voice to unsilence myself, to release the leftover shame, and to give others permission to do the same. On season 2 of this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my experience in education. But even more importantly, I'm going to be bringing on some incredible guests who are going to unsilence themselves. They're going to share their own stories of trauma, shame, and their journeys to healing, resiliency, and self-acceptance. While I believe these episodes will be deeply impactful, I do want to add a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering topics. So please take the invitation to pause or skip or fast forward on any episode, and to treat yourself gracefully and kindly after each time that you listen. Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest this week, Chantal Cox. I'm going to actually let her, as I always do, introduce herself because it's so much juicier when it comes from the person. So Chantal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and share my story. And so I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a transformation NeuroCoach, and a certified life purpose coach. And I'm just really passionate about helping women connect with their unique purpose so that they can permanently remove the blocks that have been holding them back so they can really step into their full potential and live an aligned and fulfilling life of impact.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I really I resonate with what you're doing because I think it's so important to help women live that life where they get to experience the impact of having impact, right? Yeah. So your story is really interesting, and I wanted to have you on here because I think it's something that a lot of our listeners are going to resonate with. So can you tell us your story of experiencing shame?
Yeah. So I grew up always kind of really battling depression and anxiety, really, really low self-esteem. That led me to make some kind of poor choices relationship-wise because I sought out people that treated me the way that I felt I was deserving of. And I felt very unworthy of anything good, anything kind, anything loving. And so I found myself in an abusive marriage with a self-diagnosed narcissist and just really stuck there, feeling stuck and feeling like, okay, I grew up in this good family. I'm educated. At that point, I had a master's degree. And I'm like, how did I get here? And I was raised in a very Christian household. And, we said vows before God. And so I didn't feel like I could leave. I was also doing a lot of lying and hiding for him. He was in the military. And so really, you have to put up this front, like you can't let anybody know what's going on behind closed doors. So it was very isolating, very alone, and a lot of shame of how is this my life? How did I get here? I commonly joke, I'm like, I've seen a Lifetime movie. Like, how did I get here? How is this? How am I living a Lifetime movie? And so on my 30th birthday, I was able to leave, get out and stay out of that marriage with the help and support of a very strong support system of friends and family. And then really just start rebuilding myself and my life and figuring out what are those thought patterns that are definitely not serving me, because I did not want to continue down that path and just end up in that same situation with someone different.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So a couple of things here that I just want to pull out. One is, I think you're speaking to something that is super important, which is that so many people experience this of how did I get here? Right? How did I get here? How is this my life? And also there's no way to talk about it. Right? And I think you bring up a really good point about like how there's especially when there's specific systems that are in place, like religion or the military or like social structures that actually make it harder to talk about the thing. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I grew up in a very religious Christian household, and my dad is now a retired colonel in the Army. So, I grew up in the Army, and he was frequently one of the higher ranking officers. Sometimes in the country we were living in, he was the highest ranking officer. And so, I was always the commander's daughter, the colonel's daughter, we were even at a higher level of scrutiny. My parents would kind of say, like, whether you like it or not, we live in a fishbowl. Like, people are watching, people are looking, people are judging, people are talking. Like, we have to have this level of perfectness when we walk out the door. That's a lot of pressure. And luckily, I grew up in a very loving household. I was not hiding anything like I was when I was married. But still, we're imperfect people and we have stresses and, extended family drama. And we were just told very much like, nope, anything with our family is not to be shared outside of our family unit. We are our circle of trust and nobody else is in it. And so that was ingrained in me since childhood. And then I marry into the military. And I'm a teacher by trade, and so I'm working on the base or the school right outside the base that serves the base kids. So the parents of my students, the other teachers I'm working with, they're all in this community as well,
Yeah.
and their husbands are my husband's boss and things like that. And so I did not have a safe place, and we got actively involved in a church, and of course they thought we were this perfect little family and everything was great, and everything from the outside looking in looked perfect and amazing.
This is deeply resonating. So my parents weren't in the military. However, both sets of grandparents were in the military. And so my parents both experienced a life, I think, very similar to what you are sharing, which, I'm not going to speak their stories for them. And this is something that gets passed on from generation to generation that I don't think we talk about a lot, is like this idea of, especially, my grandfather being a lieutenant colonel in the Navy, or excuse me, in the Army, that level of scrutiny, especially as like people of color, right? Very, very high. And the idea that everything has to look perfect from the outside, it's so much pressure. It's so much pressure. And especially when there's not like you don't have external connections to other people where you can like let that guard down for a minute and be like, actually, this is what's going on. That's a lot.
It is. Yeah. And I do just want to state that, yes, I am Mexican. You can see me because we're on video.
Oh, yeah.
Your audience can't. But my dad that raised me, he adopted me. And so the family I was raised with is with my birth mother. But I'm the only one of color in the family unit. And so that does add another level of, I think, how I never felt like I fit in or I had to prove myself, I didn't belong, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I guess my question would be, hearing you talk about how you are, it kind of feeling like you went from a fishbowl to a fishbowl, right? What I talk about this with clients sometimes, and I think I've used this example on previous podcasts of like, sometimes you don't realize like when you're born into water, you don't realize that you're like surrounded by water, until you get taken out of that and you're like, oh, wait a second, like this isn't normal. Kind of like what you said of, wait, how is this actually the way that I'm supposed to be living? Because this doesn't feel right. So like, how did you come to realize that you were ready to like not be in that fishbowl anymore?
Yeah, for me, what happened was before I met my ex-husband, we met online. And so before we met in person, I had told him I had two deal breakers. One was at the time, I think I was like 27, 28, and he had already been married and divorced once and I think he was about 3 at the time. And so I said, you already divorced and you already have a child, and I have two deal breakers. One is I want to be a mom. I want children. So
Mm.
if you don't want more children, don't come meet me. And two, you already have a divorce under your belt. I don't believe in divorce. So if you ever think that's an escape option again, don't come and meet me.
Mm.
So we're approaching my 30th birthday, and our plan was to start our family, to actually like start trying for and get off the birth control and do all the things. And so we're weeks away from my 30th birthday, and this has been the plan for a year or so. And he tells me, I've been thinking about it. My son is getting ready to go in kindergarten, and I really don't want to do diapers again. And so I know that's a deal breaker for you. And I know that means you have to leave. Sorry. And I was like,
Wow.
what? Just total like sideswiped out of nowhere. And so there were several days of just absolute confusion and turmoil and anger, like all the emotions. And I finally went to him and I said, well, yes, one of my deal breakers was around the kid thing, but the second deal breaker was divorce. And I said, so this has already happened. We've already gotten married. I can't undo that. So what I need to do is figure out how to not hate you for the rest of my life, and how
Mm.
to just be happy that, this is our little family and that's all that there's going to be, and that's going to be okay. He did not like that answer because he had an ulterior motive.
Mm.
And so that's when the physical really picked up and got very dangerous. And then is when I needed to reach out for help and get out.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like letting that sink in for a second, just like witnessing you in that. First of all, that blindsidedness of, oh wow, this thing that I thought was the thing is not the thing, right? That's like one of those life moments where it's just like, what do I do here, right? And then it sounds like you and I want to reflect that language back, because I think this is important for the listeners to hear. Like, how do I figure out how to not hate you, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I figure out how to not live with like this huge amount of resentment? And what I'm hearing is that that was like such a rock hard place situation, right? Of like, okay, I have to choose the lesser of two evils. And I always say, like, if you're choosing between the lesser of two evils, then there's a third choice that like you're just not seeing, right? Which
Right.
I think is awesome. I think you found the third choice. But I also just like witnessing you in the fact that then this choice got made for you in like a very dangerous way.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanna ask this question. I want to be a little delicate with this, and I guess put a little bit of like a trigger warning on it. There are women who have gone through what you've gone through, right? And who stay for whatever reasons, right? And that is not something that anybody, if they do stay, should feel ashamed about or feel guilty about or any of those things. And I'm curious for you, what inside of you said, you know what, no, like I'm not staying.
Yes. So I 100% understand why people stay, and why once people leave that they may go back. Like it was hard. And so just because these were the choices that I was able to make with the support system that I had, does not mean they're right for everybody. And definitely everyone's journey is their own unique personal journey. And so, yes, we're just telling the story of my unique personal journey without judgment of any other route that anyone may take. So definitely that feeling of, okay, so I'm not going to have this with you. That was a big piece of it, the not being able to be a mother. And then I had friends come down. So he was stationed in a different state. So I had relocated, which also added to the isolation. And so I had two really good friends come down for my 30th birthday. And I ended up telling one of them, like, very tip of the iceberg type of things. Like, I don't even think I mentioned any of the physical stuff, but I told her about the child thing that that was no longer on the table and that I was heartbroken over that and trying to figure out how to process that and a couple other things. And she happens to be a licensed clinical social worker. And
Mm.
so her red flags coming in were already kind of like, something's not right. I don't like this, but she had no idea to the extent. And so the couple of things I shared the next morning, he went to work and she said, I can't leave you here. And my birthday happens to be in the summer. So I was on summer break because I'm a teacher. And so I said, okay, well, we'll go. I'll stay with my sister and my now ex and I will go to therapy. We'll figure this out. And, 20 years from now, we're going to look back on this first year of marriage and just be like, man, that was really tough, but look how far we've come. Like divorce still was not really on in my head at that moment. It was more of a, let me get a break. Let me get some perspective. Let us get some help. And then once we got there, got to my sister's house, my mom and dad had driven down from where they'd retired. And we're just sitting in my sister's living room. And again, I'm telling things that I have not really processed or thought about or admitted to myself or anyone else. And again, it was still very tip of the iceberg. I was not telling like the really bad things, probably because I wasn't ready to admit them to myself. And my dad got down on my level, like I was sitting on a couch. And so he kind of knelt down and he said, and mind you, this is the religious leader of my family, the foundation of this Christianity, you said vows before God. And so he gets down on my level and says, do you think this is salvageable?
Mm.
And so I start regurgitating the Sunday school answers of, well, we said vows before God and we'll figure it out. We'll work it out. And he kind of stopped me and he said, I don't think this is salvageable. And I think if you go back, the next time I see you, it'll be in a body bag.
Mm.
And that's finally when my brain snapped and was like, oh crap, like this is serious. And like, I think I just responded like, well, what do I do? And he said, lawyer up. And I just started like crying. It's my 30th birthday. I don't know how to lawyer up. Like, I don't know how to do these adulting things. Like, what the hell? So happy birthday to me. And then we just started piecing together a to-do list and took out one thing at a time until I was divorced and had a job back where I came from and had an apartment and could start piecing back together my life.
Mm. Wow. So like a couple things I'm hearing. One is, first of all, I love your dad.
Yep, right.
I love your dad.
He's amazing.
I really do. And I want to say that because I think that there are so many people out there that don't have that type of support. Mm-hmm. And so like really just honoring the fact that you had so many people be like, no, this isn't okay. Like, that's so beautiful. And it makes me so like the situation is awful, but just like hearing that you had people do that for you is really awesome. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are afraid to do, right? They're afraid to get into other people's business. They'll talk themselves out of the red flags that they're seeing in other people's relationships. And so I love that your friends, didn't do that and risked you being very upset with them, because that happens sometimes, right? Like that's gorgeous. And the other thing I want to just pull out here too is like what you're saying, I think is something that a lot of people need to hear, is that we oftentimes don't realize how bad things were until we like either get out of them and get some perspective, or until we're talking about it to someone else and like the perspective is reflected back from them.
Right.
And so, I've been in those situations before, not with my husband, but like in other places where it's like, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. It was just that one time. They didn't really mean it. And there's almost like some self-gaslighting that occurs, right? Because and just hearing you say that, he identifies as somebody who has narcissistic tendencies, like people with narcissistic tendencies tend to gaslight. And then those on the receiving end of that tend to then like take those in ourselves and start gaslighting ourselves, right? And for anyone who doesn't know what I mean by gaslighting, that's basically like invalidating your version of reality, saying that's not how that happened. That's not how it really That's not how it really went down. That's, you shouldn't feel that way. That's wrong. All those things. So, you just talked, like you talked through the steps that you took to kind of, from a strategic standpoint, move through, but like emotionally, what kind of, like, what did you do to be able to work through this?
I remember things like my mom went down with me to that state to do the final thing with the judge and sign the paperwork. And it was all agreed upon. There's like
Oh,
non-contentious or something like
yeah.
that. So he did not have to be there. And so my mom and I just went down and stood before the judge and signed and, decreed you're officially divorced. And so then as we're driving back, she was just like, wow, like that's pretty intense. Like, do you want to stop and get a drink somewhere? And I was like, if I start drinking, I don't think I'll ever stop. And
Mm.
so, like, for a long time there, like, I refused to cry for the same reason. I said, if I start crying, I don't think I'll ever stop. um, and so I did a lot of almost compartmentalizing. And then as soon as I could, got plugged into therapy. I mean, I had to wait for my new job to kick in and my new benefits, but got plugged into therapy and started processing some things. And that was extremely helpful. But yeah, I'm kind of a taskmaster. And so I just tried to say, what are the things I have to accomplish today? And just went after them and didn't allow myself to think of oh, I have to find a new apartment because I left my husband and my
Mhm.
beautiful house and my pool and da 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 da. Like, and oh, great, look at this crappy little 1 bedroom apartment with white walls and I have nothing. And just being like, okay, well, now I need a bed and now I need a this and now I need, like, what do we got to do here? I need towels. I need dishes. I need, and just focusing on what's the next step forward? What's the next thing that I need to do to survive?
Yeah. I think we make people wrong for doing what you do. Sometimes I'm also, when it comes to grief, like a taskmaster. I'm like, okay, what needs done? Who needs taken care of? Like, what are the things? And then once everything's taken care of, then I like just freaking fall apart, right? And I don't even want to use that term fall apart, but like start processing everything emotionally. And I think we're taught like that's not the right way to grieve because that's what you're doing, right? Like you're literally, you've lost this whole experience, this relationship, this life that you think you're going to have that is totally worthy of grief, right? And something I learned, or I heard when I was going through my trauma training was, however you process grief, whether, as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting someone else, is good. Like that first year, however you do it. So if you throw yourself into projects and focus on like putting art on the walls instead of focusing on why you have to put art on the walls or whatever, that is healthy and that is okay. And that is not something that you should shame yourself for. And I think so often, like sometimes people want to they're like, oh, but it's weird you're not crying. It's weird you're not like getting into your feelings around this. And so I just like, I want to honor your process and also like normalize that for anyone else who's listening to this, because I know there are people out there that like immediately grieve the thing and in a way that's like very emotive, and so good for you if you're one of the people who do that. But like for some of us, that's not the way that we can get through it. And so really just like honoring that process for you. How did, if you don't mind me asking, like when you got into therapy, like what did that look like for you? And also too, I just like want to witness the fact that you had to wait for your new job to get into therapy, which is like just a testament to how things are currently in our society. But like how did that go for you? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I had been to my first experience with therapy my senior year of high school. My mom had made me go because I was experiencing a depression, and
Mm-hmm.
we'd moved to another country my senior year. I'd lost all my friends, my boyfriend, my ability to drive, because in this country you couldn't drive till you were 18. So I
Mm-hmm.
had my own truck and a job and all this freedom to this. And mind you, we're in the freaking Netherlands. Like, how cool is that? Like, it turned around and was an amazing experience. But there at the beginning, it was very rocky. And so she took me to a therapist. And so I had experience with therapy. I was open to therapy. Like going to therapy was not a hurdle I needed to overcome of,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I've never done that. That's weird. That's like, I knew. And oh, I was in therapy when I was down there and still married, because there was a lot of gaslighting going on. And anything he would do, he'd say, I would never ever treat anybody like this. It's because you responded in this way, and you need to go to therapy and figure out how you can respond appropriately so that it doesn't drive me to do these things to you, because that's not fair to me. That's not fair to my son. Like, we shouldn't have to live in this house with your toxicity. So you need to go fix
Wow.
that. Yep. So,
Ooh, I'm
yeah.
surprised you went back after. I don't know that I would have wanted to go to therapy again if that had been one of my experiences. So, but it sounds like this experience after you were out of the marriage and in the new job in the new place was better.
Yes. So I got partnered with an amazing woman. She wasn't too much older than me, so kind of in my age range. And it was just a safe place to talk where other people, they love you. They're your friends and they're your family. And so they want to jump in and solve, or they want to jump in and share a similar experience of their own, or their neighbors, or their cousins, or whatever. And so therapy allowed me just a safe place to just be and feel the emotions and say whatever came to my mind without judgment and begin processing. And then she could reflect some of those things back to me that I thought and I said and came out of my mouth, but I wasn't processing them in a healthy way. And she was able to say, okay, let's unpack that a little bit and help me start to unravel and uncover the level of gaslighting that had been going on, and that I was pretty much brainwashed at that point, like, as to what reality looked like.
Mm. So first of all, I love your mother for even like, now I love your mom too, because of the fact that like she made therapy a normal thing for you. I think that that's something that for a lot of people they don't have, right? And just the fact that I think you're speaking to something that's really important, which is like rapport, right? With the person that you're going to be with. I am so glad to see that like a lot of our generation, younger generations, like therapy, coaching, counseling, all of those things are becoming so much more widely accepted, because I think people realize like, I'm not supposed to do this by myself. And also my friends are my friends and my family is my family. And like, I need to be able to say things out loud that like, once they come out, I'm like, oh, that's not what I meant. Or like, oh, that was actually like really harsh. Right. And that's not how I would want to say that to somebody that I love, but like, I need to say it that harsh way to like get it out of my system. Right. So, I think that this is such an important part of the conversation. And I'm so glad that you're sharing this, is because we're like destigmatizing and taking the shame out of like, go talk to someone that you can say all of the things to, and they're not going to be like, oh wow, like that was really mean, or that was, oh, like you really think that. Like there's not going to be any shame or guilt, or like you're not going to have to worry about how it's being perceived on the other end.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so critical to have that outside perspective that's not a friend or family member. You need that supportive friend and family member also. But yeah, that's a huge reason of why I now feel it's, one of my purposes to go out and share my story is to break down that stigma, break down those walls, because when I was growing up with anxiety and depression, nobody was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did happen to mention it, it was, well, look at everything you have to be grateful for. Why don't you go help somebody less fortunate than you? Let's go volunteer at a soup kitchen. That'll put things in perspective. And depression was never about these things, spiraling on things I didn't have or feeling sorry for myself in that way. It's a chemical imbalance in my brain that I can't control. And so, yes, so many of these things in my life, I felt isolated, alone, shame, and like nobody else had ever experienced anything like this. And so I love the opportunity like this to share my story so that other people can hear it and not feel so alone. And yeah, we really need to break the stigma. And we've gotten so much better as a society over the last few years, but yeah, keep that ball rolling.
Yeah. I I like love slash hate what you said about like, but like look at how good your life is. Like you have money, you have a house. Like let's go down and see people. It paints it as an either or situation, right? Like either your life is good or your life isn't good. And I think that boxes a lot of people in around their mental health because it creates shame around like, well, my life is good, so like I shouldn't feel sad, or I shouldn't feel anxious, I shouldn't have the thoughts that I'm having. And in reality, it's a both and. Like, my life is really good. And maybe there's some past painful experiences that I didn't process through that are affecting how I'm seeing things. Or like maybe something really bad happened to me and it didn't, make it so that I don't still have a house, or I don't still have money, or I don't still have support. But like also, it's something that I haven't had a chance to work through because there hasn't been a safe space to do so. And so just like normalizing that it can be both and, right? Like you can have an amazing job, you can have amazing relationship, you can have supportive parents, you can have all these things and like still need a space to work through some stuff and still have feelings that are not typically looked at as good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um I actually think that that's one of the things that like keeps us in depression is the shame around like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. So like, let me do everything I can to not like, let me shame myself about feeling this way so that I stop feeling this way, except wait, like now I feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I thank you for sharing that piece. So obviously this has affected your trajectory from a career standpoint too, so like I'd love to hear more about what your life looks like now and especially your work that you started to tell us about in the beginning.
Yeah. So I am still full-time in education. But then in my, evenings and weekends, I ended up feeling really called to write a book about my story. And so I, I just compiled it together, and it's called Create a Life You Love 10 Healthy Habits to Transform Your Life Now. And that came about because it was a few years after everything we just talked about. And I had taken the time to heal, taken the space, and had a complete transformation. I had completely busted out of my comfort zone. I was doing things like skydiving, and this little like wallflower who was afraid of walking through a restaurant because someone might look at me. I was on a Latina dance team, and we were traveling to like Dallas and Kansas City and performing in front of hundreds of people. And so my friends and family are like, who the hell are you? Like, what happened? And so they started asking, you're so much more like confident and alive and vibrant. Like, we've never seen you live life this way. Like, what did you do? And how can we get a little piece of that too? This joy and this confidence that you just have. And so the teacher and me started thinking about, well, what did I do? Because I did not set out to be like, okay, now I'm going to create a life I love. Again, I was just in survival mode. Like, I have to do something different tomorrow than what I did today because I don't want to be here today. I don't want to wake up tomorrow and feel this way again. So, what am I going to do different? And just trying different things and figuring out. It's like how Stella got her groove back, like how Chantal found her groove. I'd never had a groove to begin with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I took my little teacher brain and developed kind of little lessons. Like, well, I started a gratitude journal, and the people in my circle were like, what? Like, how I've heard of people talk about it, but that seems weird. I'm like, yeah, no kidding. Like, I fought it forever because I was like, how in the hell is that going to help me? Who has time for that? And just had so much resistance. But then when I actually did it, here's what happened. And here's like 5 super simple tips that you can go do it right now. And so they'd go try it. And then they'd contact me in a couple of days and be like, okay, I've only done this 3 days. And here's what happened. So what else were you doing? Because I'm going to keep with this gratitude journal, but tell me something else too. And so we just started developing these little mini lessons and activities to help people in my circle. And then that transformed into a little mini YouTube channel, which then transformed into my book. And so as I'm going to book signings, which wasn't even on the radar, but local businesses started being like, oh, you're a local author. Here, we'll host a book signing for you. And I'm like, great, let me Google how to do a book signing. And so doing that, and then people are coming to my book signings and saying, how do I hire you? And I'm like, for what? Like, to tutor your kid? Like, I'm not going to write you a book. Like, what? I don't understand. And they're like, to be my life coach. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. I'm a teacher. I'm not a coach. Like, I had so many identity blocks. Even when people would this is my friend, she's an author. I'm like, oh, no, no, I wrote a book, but I'm not an author. And they're like, what's the definition of author? Like, we're always fighting these identities that we create for ourselves, and we feel safe in I'm a teacher. And so adopting these other identities of I can still be a teacher and an author and a coach. So yeah, then I sought out a coaching certification, and everything has just really, it's been an aligned path of I know I'm on the path that I'm supposed to be on to help other people. And so at this point, I really help people who have been through something. It doesn't have to be exactly like what I went through, but they've had some type of life experience that has taught them something that they know they have something to share, but they're struggling with adopting that identity, right? They're staying stuck in their current safety belief patterns. And so I'm a master certified neurocoach. And so we target the current neural pathways that are keeping us safe and stuck. And we rewire the brain so that we can remove those blocks and fully step into this new person that you want to be.
I love it. I love that. Oh, well, first of all, you're talking neuroscience, which is like totally my jam. But I think that this is something that's really, first of all, it's so needed, right? I think so many people think that who they are from an identity perspective is who they'll be forever. And really learning that who you are is more of a combination of your habits and your patterns and who you've been told that you are, so much more than you realize, right? And so helping actually bring out the true essence of people and like what they're really here to do, what they're really here to, like you said, the impact that they're supposed to have, I think is so huge. And like helping people see, no, like the person who you think you are is because like that's who, a lot of it is because that's who you were taught to be. And so like, let's reprogram that and let's help you shift into being like the person you actually want to be. It's so powerful. And I hadn't heard of a neuro coach before you. So now I was like, oh, I need to like go Google this and look at this certification. It sounds really, really fascinating. So, you know, holding the identity of teacher, holding the identity of author and coach, like where do you see yourself going in the next few years? Like, do you want to keep teaching? What are you planning to do?
So oddly enough, at some point in my career, I stepped into the role of an instructional coach. So I was then coaching teachers. And now, as of July 2021, I now train instructional coaches across my state and help them become coaches and coach them on being coaches and coaching educators. So my paths have really aligned very nicely.
Yeah.
And I love what I do. I'm sure I'll do this for 2 to 3 years. I do everything kind of in 2 to 3 year stints. I think it's the military brat in me. We moved every 2 to 3 years. So every 2 to 3 years, I'm like, I need a new degree or I need a new position or like, what's my next challenge? And so I would love to at some point be full time in my business. And as people go through my program to, if they feel called to be a coach, I'm going to eventually have a coaching certification program of my own and help certify coaches so they can go out and make an impact in the world. And I'm partnering with people who coach authors. So if they want to write a book, we've got a connection there. Just really building this strong community where once we identify your purpose and your vision for how you want to fulfill that purpose of impact, then get you connected where you need to go make that happen.
That is really cool. I am just reflecting on like how similar our journeys actually are. I'm very similar to you of like the every 2 to 3 years. I'm like, okay, what's next? Right. And I want to speak to this because I think this is really important. I think a lot of people see purpose as like, okay, I'm going to do one thing for the rest of my life. And I kind of like to think of it as, especially for people like us who maybe have a hard time choosing one thing, way more common than we talk about, is I think of it as like a golden thread, right? Like the golden thread of what I am here to do, like weaves through all of these different avenues of how I'm doing the thing. But like my thread is helping people release shame and really like heal from past painful experiences, right? Your thread is really helping people like shift that identity. And you're doing it in so many different ways, but at the end of the day, like that's what it's all boiling down to. And so I think that that's really gorgeous. And I think it's a much more fun way of looking at purpose. And coming back to your word of impact, you can have a much greater impact that way too. If you're like, I'm not going to box myself into like, this is the way that I have to do things for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of times I think too, like pick where you want to start. You know,
Yeah.
I started with the book and then came the coaching and then came the podcast. Like a lot of times we get stuck in that, do I want to write a book or start a podcast or get my coaching cert? Like where, and so then you just get stuck and you do none of it, right? Pick one, go after it 100%. Because if we do 10 things, 10%, we're not doing very much. But go after one thing, 100%, do it, accomplish it, own it, accept that identity, and then think, okay, now what's my next step? Well, now I've got a book that establishes some authority. Now let's go get on podcasts and make sure I even like being on podcasts before I start my own.
Yes, so important.
Right?
Yes.
And just go from there. And, you know, not everybody's journey is going to follow that, obviously. But what is it? Is it speaking on live stages? Is it just being able to own your story enough that when you hear a coworker is struggling with something similar, you have the confidence and you've processed through enough that you feel safe to go approach them and share your story with them and make a small impact in their life in the lounge at work.
That's so beautiful because you're right. Like, I think sometimes we think of impact as has to be, you know, I'm going to reach thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people. And in reality, you know, sometimes just like, I don't want to even say just helping one person, it makes such a massive difference. And I'm so glad you said the piece also of like, start with one thing. Something that's so huge is like, yeah, if you're going to bite off, there are a lot of people out there that are multi-potentialites that like to do multiple things at a time. I like to do multiple things at a time. But if you watch me, I'm doing one thing in one area and one thing in another area. And in terms of like the business perspective, I'm starting one thing, doing that thing, like I say running those plays until they work, until it's like the playbook is so memorized that you don't even have to think about it. It's working. And then you add on the next layer. And from there, that's how you can build like a really beautiful business or a really beautiful career and not feel like you're getting burned out. I love the like not do 10 things at 10%, which so often you end up like doing 10 things at 0% because
right.
you're like, well, none of this is working. Right. So I love that idea of like starting with one thing really, and also exploring, giving yourself permission to explore, giving yourself permission to like try the thing out and be like, okay, do I even like this? Because I think so often from an identity perspective, especially like kind of tying this back to like military and like there's a perfectionist tendency in a lot of us to be like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it exactly right. It has to be done fully out. Like I have to have this massive plan. And sometimes just going, you know what? I want to go be on a podcast and see if I enjoy being interviewed, or wait, do I never want to be on someone else's podcast and only want to run my own because I want to be the one asking the questions? Like allowing yourself to even try that out and see how that feels, and giving yourself permission to choose the thing that feels good and not the thing that like you think you should be doing is huge.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing that I like to ask all of my guests is if you were going to give one, well, I feel like I'm just going to say this. I feel like you've given so many pieces of advice and it's so good. I'm going to have to come back and listen to this, but what's one like final piece of advice or just, something supportive that you'd like to give our listeners who may be in a similar situation to where you were before?
Yeah. I just want everyone to know, no matter where you're at, no matter what is going on, you are not stuck. Tomorrow is a new day. 5 minutes from now is a new minute. So think about what's one tiny baby step forward out of wherever you're at. And so whether that's, like where my story kind of initiated with that abusive marriage, or if you're in a job you don't like, if you're anything, if you do run a business and it's not, performing the way you would like it to perform, if you're in your health, anywhere, you are not stuck. You have the power to move forward, but you have to give yourself permission, and you have to tell yourself you're worthy of something different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. You are worthy of something different. Everyone listening to this, if there's a place you are feeling stuck, you are worthy of something different. I fully and wholeheartedly believe that without even necessarily having ever met you. I know that's the truth. So thank you so much. So we're going to make sure that everyone can find your book in the show notes, that they can connect with you if they'd like to learn more about your work. And is there anywhere, where do you like to live? That I always like to ask it this way, where's your favorite place to connect with people, on social media or on your website? What's your favorite?
Yeah, I really love the community that we're building in Facebook. It's a free Facebook group. It's called Create a Life You Love Community. And I do a ton of free trainings there, and other people are sharing resources or asking questions. They might say, I really want to start a journal practice in 2022, and people can share what they do and different things. And so really a community where, yes, I am currently kind of the one providing the bulk of the content, but it's not always going to be that. And it's starting to evolve now where we're getting more and more interaction. So it's pretty fun to watch it unfold. So come hang out with us in the Create a Life You Love community on Facebook.
Perfect. All right. We'll be sure to drop that link below so people can join. Thank you, Chantal, so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about how you can help yourself and others release shame, heal from trauma, and create healthier, safer, more mutually beneficial relationships, I want to invite you to head to our website, institutefortrauma.com. At institutefortrauma.com, you'll find free resources, be able to connect to our free online community, and view our courses and trainings, including our foundational trauma-informed, psychologically safe certification, aka the TRIP certification. Head to institutefortrauma.com today to learn more.